Meanwhile, looks like Agatha is having a tough time falling asleep. She sits up quickly and uses her powers to confirm that the prince hasn't done anything to her. In fact, he even gave her a certain degree of freedom instead of keeping her powers suppressed with the Stone of Divine Judgment. As she glances out the window, she can't help but lament how quiet it is here, especially in contrast to Tequila, where every winter day felt like a celebration. After all, it was the season of witch awakening, and the lanterns would burn in the streets all night long. Then she thinks about her current situation, and thinks how witches are being hunted by mortals, and the alliance she once knew has also gone. She has no clue what happened, and how did the two extraordinary transcendent witches, Natalia and Alice, lose to the mortals? That's when Nightingale pops into the scene, asking Agatha why she is not feeling cold. The icy lady quickly turns around upon hearing the voice, and she is fascinated that the door is still closed, and there are no footprints, which makes her wonder if Nightingale used her ability to slip inside. Nightingale then speaks up, and since this is the first time they're really meeting, she introduces herself promptly. Well, it's technically the second time, considering the moment when she was hiding in the mist. Agatha curiously asks her if she is also a high-tier awakener. With a casual shrug, our not-so-studious girl claims that she isn't as smart as Anna, and finds all those books and studying a bit boring, so she doubts she'll ever reach that level. Agatha is intrigued by the mention of those books, and asks if she can read them too. Nightingale responds that she can, but only if she joins the Witch Union and works for the prince. Of course, Agatha protests loudly at the thought of working for a mortal, calling all the witches crazy for following a guy. Nightingale raises an eyebrow and asks why she is so stern about humans. Icy Witch then explains that in Tequila, most awakeners employ mortals as their servants, and they are often used for breeding. She firmly believes that mortals are unintelligent but does concede that they can be useful if taught properly. Still, she finds the idea of following a mortal a bit ridiculous. Nightingale then reveals that the prince doesn't treat witches as servants. He helped them while they were being hunted by the church, gave them new abilities, and made it possible for witches to live among normal people. She emphasizes that everyone has a common goal, which is to defeat the church and ultimately the devils. Agatha then explains that winning against the devils is nearly impossible, and history is living proof of that. She recounts that about 800 years ago, when both witches and mortals ruled everything, humans populated the entire realm. But when the devils attacked, they lost everything, and all that was left were the barren, fertile lands. She further explains that, according to the Alliance records, the Third Divine War is about to begin, and she believes no one here knows anything about the devils. Agatha argues that the only way to have a chance at stopping the devil invasion is to rebuild the Alliance, unify all witches, and use that knowledge to awaken more transcendent witches. Nightingale looks at her and asks why she's so negative. She reminds her that it's been 400 years since the last war, so a lot of things have changed in that time frame. Nightingale reminds her that she must have heard the prince say how mortals can slay devils too. She explains that it's not just about witches. The prince aims to unify everyone on the mainland. He told her that in order to become powerful, unifying as a nation is important. She adds that there's still plenty of time before the Divine War begins, so she encourages Agatha to witness how the prince is making things happen with her own eyes. Agatha is startled by her bold confidence. She can tell that Nightingale doesn't like her very much, and she wants to know why. Nightingale simply tells her that as long as she can swallow her pride and view the prince as a person, she won't dislike her as much. The prince himself wants Agatha to learn to adapt to the present and catch up with what's happening now, and he does not want her to be abandoned by the time. The scene transitions to the Holy City, where we find Maine kneeling before the Pope. He reports that the tundras have calmed down for now, and the snow has receded significantly. However, the arrival of fearsome devils is a more pressing issue than the casualties from their divine punishment. He asks the Pope for his guidance. The old man gestures for him to stand and walk over to him, and Maine promptly complies, sitting right before the Pope's knees. He hopes the Pope is taking care of himself. To this, the Pope responds that he doesn't need to worry about himself, as he will die soon. Maine is shocked to hear this, but the old fart tells him to save his shock for later and instructs him to listen closely. He reveals that his own end is undoubtedly near, so the reason he called Maine here is that he wants him to inherit the title of Pope. They then walk into mysterious tunnels constructed with layers of stone and mud that no one can breach. There are some secrets hidden, and every pope must come here before they inherit the title, and each one is expected to expand and strengthen the church while holding its goals close to their hearts. Main promptly responds that he knows his goal is to defeat the devils. But the old coot reminds him that this isn't the main goal. The true objective is to earn the smile of God. Once they reach the end of the corridor, the Pope tells Main to wheel the wheelchair himself, explaining that no one can go further than this point. Main acknowledges this and promptly starts pushing his senior's wheelchair. As they enter the chamber, the gates behind them close. They walk past walls adorned with portraits of previous popes, including the image of the current pope, which hangs prominently among them. The old man reveals that his own picture was taken only about 6 months ago, so he doesn't look that old in it. He adds that the portrait was supposed to be hung after his death, but he was too impatient to see how it would look. Main asks if all the portraits are of previous popes, to which the old man responds positively, saying they are the glorious defenders. The past popes ruled as the voices of God and led the church through trials. As they walk further inside, the old man continues narrating that with each generation, they struggled in the torrents of time. They drifted and eventually collapsed, and the upcoming popes will face the same challenges. Suddenly, Main spots some portraits of women hanging on the wall, and the old man confirms that the witches were also popes. This shocks Main, but he is even more boggled to see Alice's photo hanging there majestically. He can't help but call her marvelous. The old man quickly bows his head in front of her portrait, and reveals to Main that she was the first pope and the extraordinary Transcendent, known as Alice. The old man reveals that she also held the title of the Queen of Witches. Main quickly supports the old man as he staggers, and asks why the creator of the church would be a witch. The old fart tells his junior to kneel down quickly, and Main promptly pays his respects to the witch as well. At that moment, the Pope calls out to Zero, and she promptly appears. The Pope orders her to bring Main into her illusions. The lady agrees, and Main is surprised to see that a pure witch would be in such a secretive place. Even though they were raised by the Pope after awakening, they are still witches. Meanwhile, the witch, on the other hand, begins to weave some kind of magic, causing Alice's painting to move away, and a hidden door appears. The witch then asks for permission to take the necklace off the old man's neck, and he grants it. She walks through the newly opened gate, and the Pope turns to Main, telling him that the crystal she's holding will soon be in his possession. It has the power to open any fortified door, including the church's classified library and its research facilities. The witch gestures for Main to follow her, and they both enter the gate, leaving the old man behind. As they walk through the empty space, Main asks her how His Holiness allowed her to get inside. She casually replies that someone has to activate the Stone of Illusion, especially since it requires magic. Main isn't really a fan of her nonchalance. He thinks to himself that once he inherits the title, he'll teach her a lesson about who's the boss. He annoyingly sits down and tells her to start the procedure. The girl promptly agrees, but says she'll need a little more preparation since it's the first time she's activated this particular illusion. Main is shocked to hear that this is her first time, and wonders if her claim of being alive for 200 years is just nonsense. This also means that she has never attended any previous inaugurations. Right at that moment, Main is sent back in time, finding himself in an illusion where all the witches of the Witch Alliance are gathered in a heated discussion. One of the witches states that it's all thanks to Queen Alice's orders that they've gained an advantage against the Mad Devils and their underworld leader. In the heart of the conference, Main spots the Queen of Witches, Alice, her presence commanding attention. One of the witches argues against the procedure that requires sacrificing their own, and the chances of producing a Judgment Night are low as well. But one points out that these issues can be fixed over time with further research. The witches continue to argue among themselves about the lives of their kind, and the room is split. That's when Alice commands them to stop yapping, and everyone promptly falls silent at her single command. She then reminds them that mortals cannot win against devils. They can either do nothing and enjoy their final moments as the devils invade, ultimately being wiped away from history, or they can put up one last fight by placing their trust in their divine punishment soldiers. Alice states that while she may be the Queen of Comet City, she is willing to leave this decision to the rest of them. She tells them they can choose whether they want to die in silence or exact revenge for their fallen sisters. She believes they can still purge the realm of the dawn of devils and revive the witches' glory days, granting them the freedom they crave. Alice also reminds them that since none of them will be alive to participate in the Third Divine War, either choice will lead to a peaceful ending to their short lifetimes. Main finally grasps the situation, which is that the production of divine punishment soldiers was originally started by the witches themselves. Meanwhile, Alice challenges everyone to simply stand if they disagree with her proposal. Maine impatiently looks forward to seeing how many will dare to oppose her heartless solution. Right on cue, one of the witches who had protested before stands up, declaring that killing witches for the sake of witches sounds ridiculous. An older witch quickly tries to calm her down, explaining that if humanity dies, the witches will perish too. Another witch also supports this statement, insisting that no matter how many witches they sacrifice, there will always be more to replace them if humanity survives. The more mortals they have, the more witches will emerge, so their numbers can always be replenished. The old lady then asks if the divine punishment soldiers can really defeat the devils. Alice simply replies that she can't be sure because no one will know the answer unless they try. The failure of the divine war has shed light on many problems, one of which is that the devils have far more power than they do. The only thing holding those devils back is the red mist. This means that even if they create huge armies of divine punishment soldiers, they might not achieve victory. Another witch quickly points out that even if there's just a shred of possibility, they'll still give it their best shot. She votes in favor of Alice's plan, and the other witches agree too, hoping that what Alice said will turn out to be true. With that, Alice rules out the final judgment, and says they'll discuss this decision with the rest of the Alliance. The old witch then points out that others might not listen to her, and if she doesn't want the divine punishment operation to have any obstacles, the witches can't exist as the highest ruling power. Alice quickly says that if that's the case, their alliance will have to dissolve, and they'll need to bury everything they've done so far. She claims she'll try to convince them, but if they can't accept it, Comet City will handle things alone and create a new order. Once the main guy finally learns the origin of this divine punishment army, he's at a loss for words. At just the right moment, Zero grabs him and yanks him out of the illusions. He gasps for breath, and she asks if he needs help on his way out. He tells her he can walk himself and asks her to just open the door. Once they're out, he tries to say something to the Pope, but all the lore he just absorbed is weighing heavily on his mind. He starts to feel dizzy and ends up plopping down at his feet. The old man gently pats Maine on the head. The Pope assures his child that the magic stone imprinted the memory into him, so feeling nauseous is natural. He says he felt the same way and will recover with some rest. Zero then asks why she's not feeling anything. The Pope reminds her that she's a witch, and her body is accustomed to magic, since witches are superior to mortals in both stamina and immunity. Maine asks if this is the origin of the church, to which the Pope agrees. He explains that Alice led 3 cities to victory, created brand new laws, and spread the word that witches were no longer chosen by God, but were instead cursed by the temptation of demons. This historic event became known as the Battle of Faith, and it lasted nearly 100 years. He asks if she lived for that long, to which the Pope replies, no. He explains that Alice died in a fight against another extraordinary transcendent, Natalia, and they both died fighting each other. The second Pope kept her mission alive and continued the fight until the other cities fully came on board. Unfortunately, the battle left all 3 cities severely wounded, and they lost almost all their governing power. The mortals who were unwilling to participate in the war settled on this cramped continent, and started building a civilization with the natives, eventually forming the 4 great kingdoms. The church had to prune some scattered rebels, but the structure of the world had already been set, and they ultimately failed to unite the continent, all because of the queen's early death. He explains that not only was her ally, Natalia, unwilling to accept her plan, but she even tried to assassinate Alice during a meeting. This was all recorded in the holy books. He claims that if Alice had lived, the Battle of Faith would have ended 50 years earlier, and the church would have had more than enough time to gather all the witches and unify the continent. Maine still seems confused, and asks why the title of Pope is given to the mortals, since it was carried by the witches in the past. Before dropping any interesting lore bomb, the old man tells Zero she should go. The girl promptly leaves. At first the old man lets out a sigh, then explains that it's because of the fear and weakness mortals feel. Maine is shocked to hear this, and the old man repeats it once again. He explains that Alice mandated that the Pope position must be held by a transcendent witch to restore their glory after the devils were defeated. However, transcendent witches are incredibly rare, so there weren't many suitable candidates. Later on, some accomplished witches with common powers became Pope. But fear and weakness are like venomous snakes. Once they sink their teeth into the heart and mind, there's no stopping them. He reveals that a mortal archbishop worried they would be tricked and oppressed by the witches. So he took the position, and all future popes ended up being mortals. He calls himself and all other mortals cowards who have stolen the fruits of the witches' sacrifice. He insists that no matter what happens, the Church will always bury this secret, and the truth of the divine war is all recorded in the Holy Temple. Maine will be the one to carry all of this forward with him. The old man even tells Maine that if he wants to give up the position, that will be his decision to make. Maine asks then, who will carry this burden? But the old man doesn't respond. With that, he dies, leaving Maine shouting in despair. The scene then transitions to the border town, where we see Agatha paying a visit to the prince. He hopes she's enjoying her stay and asks if she likes the porridge and fried eggs of this era. Agatha looks a bit lost in her own thoughts. As a witch of the Alliance, she can usually determine a person's intelligence with just a glance, but she can't do that with him. His eyes are filled with a strange aura and confidence, as if he has lived for thousands of years and has the world in his palm. Anyhow, she responds to the prince, telling him she would have preferred if no witches entered her room without her permission. Prince promptly assures her that he'll have Nightingale knock before coming in. He then mentions that if she wants to go outside and visit the town, Nightingale can show her around. Miss Scroll can also provide any historical information because she has the ability to store every book in her mind. Agatha reminds him that since devils are such a huge threat, she's actually curious to know why he said mortals can win against them. If he can't defend against them, then there will be no one alive to remember history and culture. Prince decides to talk about how the economy works and its benefits for people, but he pushes that aside for now. Since she seems more interested in learning about battles and weapons, he tells her she's in luck because the border town's forces are going to test new weapons this afternoon. But before they head outside, the prince has a question. Agatha sits down in the chair and gives him permission to ask. He asks her how many meals a day the citizens of Tequila City ate, what their staple foods were, how much meat they consumed, what their salaries were like, and if witches ever worked in agriculture or smithing. Agatha nonchalantly reveals that her guards and servants ate 3 meals a day and could have meat every week, except during the months of demons. They served her for life and didn't receive any compensation other than food, shelter, and knowledge. She adds that they did work for witches and handled agriculture by themselves. The prince perks up with excitement at these juicy details, leaving Agatha wondering why he's so interested in Tequila City's quality of life. She's puzzled as to why he seems more focused on these things rather than the devils who dominate most of the realm of Dawn. He then asks her about the Scholarly Guild, which she claims was focused on researching magic stones. Agatha explains that magic stones all began as stones of divine judgment. They could either suppress a witch's abilities or allow witches to tap into different strengths. Tilly curiously asks how the process worked exactly. Agatha explains that the Scholarly Guild dedicated all its efforts to uncovering the secret, and they finally determined the connection between magic and the stones. Many sacrifices were made in the pursuit of this knowledge. She then adds that she could tell him more, but he'd have to exchange it for the method he used to awaken witches. The prince responds that he has no problem with that. Princess Tilly then points out that the magic stone she found in the ruins allows her to fly, and there's no question it's incredibly useful in combat, for both offense and retreating. So, she's curious why someone like Agatha, a higher-tier awakener, chose to retreat to the misty forest on foot instead of using a magic stone like this. Agatha explains that while they understood the relationship between the stones and magic, they weren't able to create the stones themselves. When Tilly asks why, Agatha elaborates that the stones were created by the devils. If the witches had access to a stable source of these stones, support witches could have fought without relying on the divine punishment army. She explains that there is a unique devil they call the Chaos Beast, which looks like a giant flower, about the height of 3 or 4 people, and can use its vines to walk. If it swallows a stone of divine judgment, it can create many different stones. The speed at which it creates them varies depending on the type of stone. Agatha explains that they had ambushed a devil camp far from the battle and captured a Chaos Beast alive, bringing it back to Tequila for their own benefit. The monster had incredibly low intelligence and converted every stone they fed it, but they didn't know how it worked or how to keep the monster alive. After 6 months, the creature shriveled and rotted like a typical plant. Later, the Scholarly Guild sent many witches to investigate other camps, and all reports confirmed one fact: Chaos Beasts were the only method for acquiring magic stones. More powerful stones took longer to convert, and most devils used magic stones in combat. For example, mad devils could activate the stones within their arms for powerful ranged attacks. All the stones they had acquired were from enemies or their camps. Tilly is in awe to realize that the stone she possesses is from one of the devils. Agatha confirms this, stating that it probably belonged to an extraordinary transcendent witch. The prince then asks if the devils always possessed multiple types of stones from the beginning. Agatha shakes her head with no, revealing that if that were the case, humans would have been subdued long ago. She explains that during the First Divine War, most devils didn't have stones. They relied on their sheer strength, thick armor, and metal spears to attack human cities, which is extensively detailed in history books. Every battle lasted for hundreds of years until human territory was reduced to just fertile lands. If they had focused all their resources on training combat witches, the devils wouldn't have been able to reach the realm of dawn at all. During the Second Divine War, the devils gained more methods and strategies, and it only took them 35 years to defeat the humans. The Divine Army might be able to fight toe-to-toe with the leaders of the underworld, but there are just too many devils now. Agatha reveals that she's heard from the elders in the Alliance that witches used to have the upper hand. One extraordinary transcendent witch could slay an army of devils. But the devils have grown in number and efficiency at an alarming rate, so she doesn't know what the next attack will be like. She also goes on to explain how devils are categorized into 3 groups: mad devils, fearsome devils, and the underworld rulers. These terms were only created during the Second Divine War. Before acquiring magic stones, there wasn't much difference between them, aside from size. Tilly curiously asks how the devils reproduce. Agatha is startled by the question and admits she's not sure. It was never recorded, and there's no way to learn it through captives either. What she does know is that without the red mist, devils die quickly. The captured devils always died before witches can even understand their language, and the devils that don't rely on the red mist are low-intelligence beasts, so communication was never an option. She further explains that there are many different types of devils, but they're roughly divided into 2 groups, those with magic and those without. The latter can live without the red mist, but they are essentially the same as animals in both appearance and intelligence. For example, devils use an 8-legged caterpillar to transport resources and terrifying flying beasts as mounts. The prince pulls out one of Sora's paintings and asks if this is what the flying monsters look like. Agatha looks at it and agrees, then asks where he encountered them before. The prince explains that they aren't far from here. At first he thought they were simply demons that the devils had tamed, but now it seems they aren't the same thing. Agatha confirms, saying that's definitely not the case. Demons are just food for devils, and even large abnormal demons are enemies of the devils. When the months of demons begin, the devils' attacks are reduced since they're busy fighting off the demons too. This always gave the witches some breathing room. She then asks where the nest of the devils is located. Tilly explains that it's to the west of the forest, behind a huge snowy mountain, and it's covered in mist. The prince adds that when they tried to get close, a massive devil in a watchtower spotted them, and it was a miracle they managed to escape. Agatha sinks into deep thought after hearing this, then abruptly stands up, declaring they should attempt an attack on that camp. She explains that those stone towers are used to maintain the red mist, and they regularly diffuse the liquid inside, meaning they have to resupply at times. That's why the devils were burrowing into the ground. They were trying to conserve their consumption. Wendy and the others tense up at the idea of attacking the devils, while Agatha continues, saying that if there's a tower devil, she's almost certain there's a chaos beast in the camp as well. Chaos beasts can always produce the last magic stone the devils created, and even if it's not a high-tier stone, it would allow her to continue the scholarly guild's research. They might even discover how the conversion process works. The prince asks her about the red mist, wondering if it's safe to go near it, even though it isn't corrosive. Agatha explains that the mist reacts negatively toward witches, but according to the guild's research, mortals, animals, and plants can survive in the red mist, and fire can make it dissipate faster. She's fired up about taking on the devils and challenges the prince to prove his bold statement that mortals can defeat them. She lays out a plan, saying that winged devils can be distracted by witches capable of flight, while the rest of the group sets up an ambush to lure the devils into a trap. Tilly, being one of the witches who can fly, feels irritated at the idea of being bait for the devils. That's when the prince reveals to her that their scouting mission was conducted using a hot air balloon, not with flying witches. He explains that this device can only carry 10 people at once, making it impossible to transport an entire army. He points out that her plan just isn't realistic, especially since they don't know how many devils there might be, and expresses concern about the casualties they could suffer in close combat. Besides, luring winged devils is a dangerous task and he can't put anyone at risk. Agatha is forced to reflect on how fighting devils under favorable conditions is nearly impossible. Whenever Tequila sends an assault, everyone is prepared to die. She starts to think of the prince as inexperienced, believing that casualties are typical when trying to achieve a goal. In her mind, he doesn't seem to understand the harsh realities of war if he cares so much about the troops' safety. She is seriously annoyed, and Wendy tries to cool her down, reminding her that maybe they'll think of a better plan once she sees the new weapons in the afternoon. But Agatha remains frustrated with the prince, and she is sure that no matter how powerful weapons this mortal has, he is still no match for devils. The prince then asks why they call it the Divine War, when all they've really been doing is defending themselves against invaders. Agatha replies that she doesn't have a conclusive answer since the books never mention why they fought those wars. However, she does agree that it's not wrong to call it a defense, especially since the devils did come to the realm of dawn through the underworld gate. She explains that according to history, the gate opens with every blood-red moon to swallow their world. It appears every few hundred years, and that's when the first devils came through, plundering the realm of dawn. The devils can only produce the red mist towers when the gate is active, and these black towers are even taller than mountains. Their range can cover almost the entire fertile lands, and once the devils settle, they attack from the edges of their red mist. Agatha is certain that this time, humanity might not have any chance against the devils at all. At that moment, Tilly offers them a chance to join the shelter on Slumber Island for safety. But Agatha just annoyingly snaps at her, asking how many people a small island can even harbor. And besides, seeking refuge there would only delay their demise, not prevent it. Finally, Prince claps his hands to disperse the tension, urging everyone to maintain a positive attitude, especially since they are already preparing for the Third Divine War in advance. He begins to walk out, saying that they can discuss other matters after lunch. As they head to the lunch area, it's clear that someone is seriously annoyed, and of course, it's Agatha. She can't believe the prince has the mood for lavish food in such desperate times. These ignorant mortals seem to lack vision. What's even worse is that she can't bring herself to reject the delicious spread laid out before her, regardless of how angry she is at the prince. As a high-level witch, she finds it utterly embarrassing to indulge in such feasts when Tequila's name is on the line. Meanwhile, Wendy, as usual, tries to calm Agatha down with her cheerful side, reminding her that enjoying a meal could be a way to keep their spirits up during these difficult times. Once the dinner wraps up, she asks why the prince left since he was supposed to show her weapons. Wendy tells her that he's taking a nap and that it's his habit, and a well-deserved rest is essential for handling his governing duties. Of course, Agatha finds it ridiculous, thinking it's just a lame excuse for his laziness. She then asks him why everyone trusts him, and why they believe he can defeat devils and take down the church. Wendy just smiles and replies that it's because the prince can make the unimaginable a reality. To her, everything the prince has done is a miracle. She explains that when witches were being hunted down, the prince saved the association. While everyone viewed them as evil demons, he created land shared by both mortals and demons. He even defended the town against months of demon attacks with an army of civilians and took down a Duke of Longsong Fortress. Now his enemies think twice before stepping into the western region. Agatha then states that these are conflicts between mortals, which is totally different from a fight between devils and the Divine Punishment Army. Wendy then explains that the prince has also taught them knowledge that helps witches evolve, and he's created mighty weapons and machines. She shares that these are miracles she has witnessed herself. They aren't folk tales or myths. They're happening right before everyone's eyes, and one day he will become the king of Grey Castle and lead them to victory against any enemy.